Hi. Um, it's been a while since I've come to you live, and there's a reason for that. And that is that with the pivot to online because of required social distancing, there has been a plethora of people coming to you live. And for those of you working from home, I am sure that you have really had a gutful of Zoom meetings and live meetings. So I've been reluctant to come to you live and to add to the noise. But over the weekend and this morning, I did post that I would come to you live, and I wanted to talk about a particular topic on anger, because I think a lot of us will be feeling anger right now. And anger gets a bad rap. Before I go into the rap that anger gets and how it really can be very misrepresented and perhaps given a bad label, I want to just address the hashtag irony that after having said I didn't want to add to the noise, I'm adding to the noise. Just because we can broadcast, I don't think we should. And it's been hard for me not to be critical of a large amount of content that has been on YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook Lives, etc., etc. We've seen people offering great content. We've seen people having emotional outbursts. We've seen people sharing their opinions, all of which, of course, under the US First Amendment is okay. You know, we all have the right of free speech. But I have a feeling that during crisis, we need to perhaps be a bit more reflective about what we say and have some thought behind what we say. And so whatever I say tonight, you may or may not agree, but the opening frame here is my positive intention is to invite you to think. I cannot profess to be right on all matters. Of course not. That would be massive arrogance. What I do get is the luxury, perhaps, of having some time to think. 20 years of being an executive coach, working with senior leaders, helping them with their strategic thinking, doing the research and the reading around what it takes to think your way through problems. At least I have a framework. Now, the other thing that I wanted to say before we start is there have been a number of words that have been overused, perhaps, or used extensively, almost to creating the point of cliche. Unprecedented, for a start. How many times have you heard unprecedented in the last couple of months? And new normal, how many times have you heard that? Now, unprecedented means never happened before. Well, this has happened before. The Great Plague of the 14th century, the bubonic plague, which wiped out 60% of the population, has happened. The flu epidemic of 1918 has happened. So we do have the ability to look back at history and ask some questions about how human beings have responded to this before. So on a human level, on the basic human level, I noticed personally that when COVID hit, I was angry. And I was angry that COVID hit in the first place. I was angry that it disrupted my routines, my business. And then I became angry at some of the leadership that really was absent in dealing with this. And of course, it's easy to point the finger. And then I was angry at the way people were communicating and spreading false narrative. So firstly, I experienced my own anger, and then as an executive coach, I began to work or continue to work with some of the C-level and senior executives that are my clients from multinational companies from around the world. And they were angry too. They were going through the stages of grief, anger, frustration, denial, bargaining. And then after a few weeks, even depression, because they couldn't be as active and as goal-driven as they wanted. So let's just talk about anger for a moment, because as I said earlier, it gets a bad rap. A lot of people think that anger is a negative emotion. It is a low-class emotion. It shows a lack of education or enlightenment. And in this day and age where everybody wants to be a little bit elevated, anger seems such a crass emotion. Now, I understand why people would be so negative about the term anger, because we can quickly associate anger to acts of violence. And at no point am I suggesting that you utilize your anger in an act of violence. And I think that is completely the wrong way to respond to this. Anger is no less or greater emotion than any other of our emotions. All of our emotions are a feedback loop to give us information between our internal mental model, map, or schema and the outside world. We get angry when our psychological or physiological boundaries are attacked or broached. So if you get shoved in a public place, if you're pushed, you can potentially respond with anger. This is my space. You've invaded my space. Just consider people who've pushed in front of you in the queue at the airport to notice that level of anger. But we also get angry when things don't fit our mental schema, when somebody says something, challenges our values or our beliefs. And so, I noticed my anger when I was watching news coverage, or so-called news coverage, of the pandemic, that I could see complete fabrications being espoused in the name of information, when really they were ideas and concepts that were designed to push a particular agenda. And I felt that was disingenuous. And of course, my value of science and fact and rational response was assaulted. And I could feel that anger. And then, of course, on the other hand, I see people that are angry that their liberties are constrained, that they have been told that they cannot go out. So let's step back from the violence of the anger and look at what anger really says. It says, what I think or what I feel is under attack. And this is a huge opportunity. So anger can operate at the limbic system, the very basic reptilian part of our brain, and it gives us a flush of adrenaline, and it makes us feel powerful, which is why many people become addicted to anger. But if you are educated, you are evolved, if you do have some self-leadership, some self-awareness, you have a prefrontal cortex that moderates that anger. You have an opportunity to say, what am I angry about and what can I do about this? Now, in business, this is incredibly important, right? In business, HR will really have a problem if you express your aggressive anger in the workplace. If you yell or shout or misbehave, that obviously isn't appropriate. But anger is the force for change. I love to dissuade people from the common motivation mantra that you have to follow your passion. Now, passion is a great thing to follow. I think if I'd titled this episode on Follow Your Passion, I might have got more followers than titling it about anger. But think about it. Uber was not started by two guys who were passionate about transportation. It was started by two guys who were angry that they couldn't get a cab. So anger is not necessarily a negative emotion. In fact, it's not a negative emotion. It is an emotion that gives us an opportunity of feedback. And I think we're angry because of a number of things. We're angry because our view of the world, our 2020 was upended. Many of us set strategies and goals and expectations for 2020. And there's that key word, expectation. We are so often angry when our expectations are not met. We go to a nice restaurant, or when we still could go to a nice restaurant, and we booked and we queued up and we were there, and then the service or the food was disappointing. We get angry. Now, we could overcome anger by just releasing all expectations. This is a very sort of Buddhist approach, is if you had no expectations, then you're not going to get angry. But in business, we do set expectations for ourselves. We set expectations for our goals, our outcomes. We set expectations for our shareholders or our stakeholders. So we set expectations. So what do we do about this anger? Well, we use it as information that the expectations or the paradigms or the understandings that we have are not right. And we acknowledge that underneath that anger is a pain or a fear that we're not meeting those expectations. So when we don't meet an expectation, there is a level of pain or a level of fear. And I think a lot of us felt fear or continue to feel fear. This is not unprecedented in history, but often it's unprecedented in our living memory. And we are fearful for our livelihoods, for our loved ones, for our own health. And that means that we can respond in anger. But why not use the power of that anger to focus, like the founders of Uber, on creativity? Why not use it to challenge the way we think? A researcher by the name of Chris Argyris came up with a concept of double loop learning. And if you're interested in a model, and I can't show PowerPoints here, but if you go to my blog, selfleadership.com/blog, scroll down, April 27th, I wrote a blog, Double Loop Learning and for Surviving and Thriving. And that blog will talk to you about how instead of just making an adjustment, we need to step back and challenge the assumptions, the expectations, the mindsets that have got us into this original situation. Now, there are some huge, big global problems to solve. And one of the things that I personally am angry about is there is no global leadership working on solving a global problem at a global level. And regardless of your politics, you've got to see that the world has divided up into countries. And I don't want to name any, or blame any country. I don't want a whole bunch of you hating on me because you think I'm attacking your country or your government. But the reality is right now that we have a global pandemic, but we don't have a global response. In the past, one country or another would step up and lead a global response. That happened during the global financial crisis. It happened during the Ebola epidemic, but that's not happening now. It's kind of every man for himself, and there's a lot of blame going on. Oh, you didn't tell us about this. You didn't tell us about that. And that's kind of really, we're going to look at our assumptions around that, because we no longer live in little agrarian communes where what we do doesn't impact anybody else. We live on a planet where everything everybody else does. So if one country is applying certain approaches and another is different, another one, and we open up again and we have air travel and we have sea travel, we have land travel, what each of us does impacts everybody else. So a frustration of mine as a citizen of the world is that we don't have a global conversation. And my second frustration and anger is, even if we could, have you noticed lately how nobody is really having any great conversations? What we have is blame and attack, and everybody is operating from that fear position, and nobody's listening to anybody else. And I think one of the key problems, and I've noticed this over years of my own self-awareness and development and all of the work I've done with those that I've coached, that one key issue that prevents us listening and therefore collaborating and solving such a global problem or your individual business problem is the need to be right. What I think has been absolutely on display through COVID-19 is a massive need to be right, an inability to say, hey, this was our hypothesis, or this was my hypothesis, and I'm operating from this hypothesis based on the data that I've got, but as new data has come in, I need to update the hypothesis. What I said to you earlier was wrong. It was based on what we know now. Nobody's prepared to do that because it has huge political consequences. But hello, it's easy to see. You can rewind 2 weeks ago and see what somebody said, and 2 weeks later you see. Now, what I like about the scientific method is that the scientific method does not purport to be right all the time. A lot of people think, oh, when you say science is not a thing. It's not like a table or chairs. Science is a process, and science is constantly updating itself. In the 500 years since the plagues of the 14th century, the bubonic plague, we have developed a scientific method. At that time, the hypothesis of why everybody was dying, the hypothesis was it was astrological. It was a alignment of Saturn, or it was earthquakes releasing humors that was infecting people. Nobody knew that it was a pathogen carried in fleas on the backs of rodents. But the scientific method since then has allowed us to say, here's a hypothesis, and we work on the hypothesis, and if it isn't right, we get new data, we update the hypothesis. I love that about the scientific method. As humans, we should embrace that same thinking, that we're operating with a hypothesis in business, in health, as much as possible based on the data. And if we get new data and there is a new model or there's a new projection, we say, hey, what we said before was based on that information. What we acted on before was based on that. We have new information. Let's make a change. The problem, in my opinion, and please don't hate on me for this, is my perspective, and I think you'll find that if you examine it from an abstract perspective, it's true, is that the issue is that we're all operating on beliefs. And the difference between sort of the scientific method and a belief, whether that's a political belief or religious belief, is the problem with a belief is that because we believe certain things, they are attached to being right. When we believe in something, we want it to be right. And when we get new information with a belief, instead of updating the model and saying, hey, we need to think about this differently, we make excuses to fit the existing beliefs. It's the 21st century. It's 2020. It's 500 years since the bubonic plague. We are evolving as a species, and yet we still have this desire to believe in being right. It's really hard for a leader to say, I don't have all the knowledge, but I'm going to make a decision on the knowledge I have and to update that. But those that can are being effective. Those that are balancing their ideology with competency are being more successful. And as you look around the world at those leaders that are being effective and successful, they are the ones that are updating their ideas as much as possible based on fact. So science doesn't have all the answers right now. Otherwise, we wouldn't have a problem. Science is doing the best it can, but it's a process. And I guess what I'm interested in is, unlike the usual LinkedIn Live, where I'll say, hey, here's a problem, here's a solution to the problem, giving you practical tips on how to coach or give feedback or to lead. Today, I felt the need to come on and speak live about what I'm angry about and what you should be angry about. Is you and I should be angry about the fact that we don't have all the answers, but we should be hopeful that over human history, we've found the answers, and we've often found the answers by collaborating. And that willingness to be open to the fact I'm not right. And if we can get that level of empathy and understanding that other people are operating from fear and anger because they want to be right, but if we can create those conversations, we can collaborate. I said that unprecedented has been used over and over again, but during the London Blitz, everybody came together, worked together on a solution. The unique challenge with this pandemic is that we can't come together in a collective. We're not pulling the rubble off a building looking for survivors because of the social distancing or the physical distancing. And so we're having to come together like this. Now, I'm interested in having conversations. I'm already having conversations with thought leaders around the world on new ways to look at the world. You see, if you're in business, you want to get back to meeting your targets. If you're a white collar business, you might have been successfully navigating this. Your people are working from home. You've got access, either VPN or your systems are in the cloud. Awesome. You've managed to cut down your costs. Everybody's collaborating through Zoom or Skype or whatever you're using. But what about your customers? Are those business able to go? Will you be able to sell your goods and services to your clients? So the organic collaboration between the customers and the providers and the government in those areas. I mean, I think most of us, when we are feeling fiscally conservative, want the government out of our business. And yet when something like this happens, we want the government supporting and bailing out our businesses or giving us some help. So we are stuck. We have to look at those paradigms that we're operating from. And I think we need to start having conversations. What is really concerning during this particular pandemic is how ideologies are getting further apart, when we actually have a fantastic opportunities to bring collaboration closer together, if we can let go of the need to be right, if we can operate from a science model of let's update with new information. If we get new information that discounts what we previously did, we are going to have to update it. Let's stop shooting from the hips with vague beliefs. That's my request. And that's all you can do in nonviolent communication. And in nonviolent communication, all you can say is, hey, when this happens, this is how I felt. So a pandemic has happened, and I felt frustrated, angry, fearful, all of the things that we all felt. My need, as with all of us, is to get some level of certainty that we can start building a world during this, through this, and after this. And my request is that we start having intelligent conversations with each other to examine perhaps some of the so-called sacred cows that we have, that economic growth at all cost is everything. On the other hand, human life is everything. Now, the reality is we've always been doing a playoff around the value of human life. Unfortunately, human life has a different value depending where in the world you live. We always are playing off what is the value of human life. If we really value human lives, we would restrict speed on highways. We bring the speed limit down all over the world, but that would frustrate people and it would cost business because it would take too long to get there. So we have really, really tough decisions to make around how things are in a world where we are back to 100 years ago when death was ubiquitous. I'm approaching, I'll be 60 next year. So, my entire life we've had a medical system around us. I haven't seen that much death. I was at the bedside of both my parents when they passed. But other than that, I didn't see war. I haven't seen a large amount of death because I've lived in an area of white privilege. Different parts of the world, if you're in the Middle East, you might have seen a large amount of death. But most of us in the West, most of us haven't seen that much. And so we are not comfortable with it. It's really difficult for us to look at this. And yet it's now a reality. And we have to talk about how we as human beings don't just keep people alive, but we keep people alive in a way that they can thrive and that we have this. And so the challenge of balancing economic rationality with the human element is a tough conversation. And it's not going to be an easy one for anybody to talk about. But if we can't talk about the basics, if we can't talk about the difference between a fact and a belief, if we can't listen to each other, then my fear, my anger is that we're doomed. So I don't expect a huge number of you to go, yay, Andrew, I want you to talk to me about this. Because as Henry Ford said, thinking is the hardest work we do, which is why few people do it. So if you are interested in having conversations, I'm looking for creating a mastermind group of people who want to think about some of these, both business and global problems, and how we can improve our thinking skills about these very, very tough topics. And so if that's you, then just message me. You'll probably already be connected with me. Message me and say, hey, I'm interested in having a conversation. And I think we start here, right? Because now the way to connect is virtually. We're all connecting through Zoom and Skype, etc. And I'm saying, well, I know a lot of people, but if you're in my network and this is something that interests you, I'm interested in having my thoughts challenged. Because one of the things that I have learned over the years is I'm often more wrong than I am right. But what I do is I'm constantly updating my mental models and my information and practicing the ability of looking at multiple perspectives simultaneously. It's one of those things that as a coach, I challenge my leaders to do. In fact, one of the exercises I often get a senior leader to do is to argue against his or her premise and argue as strongly against it as for it. So those are some things to think about and realize that, feeling angry, feeling frustrated, feeling fearful, all of those are normal responses. The issue is what you do with it. Everybody can feel angry, but not everybody can choose when, where, and how to use that anger. Not everybody is channeling their anger into creativity. And that's what we need right now as a human race, is we need to be channeling into our creativity. So this is Andrew Bryant, the Self-Leadership Coach, coming to you live with a few of my thoughts that I felt I really needed to get out there. I appreciate your attention, and I appreciate that if you didn't agree with me, I don't have a problem with that, as long as you know why you didn't agree with me and we can have a discussion rather than just hating on each other, because that's not going to move anybody forwards. So again, thank you for your time. Stay tuned. I will be dropping some thoughts in LinkedIn Lives at this time each week. Ciao for now.